Hanno, shall I start?
Yeah, please give us a little introduction from your side. Hello,
Hello,
Hi.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I welcome you, all of us, to this conversation that we organized together, the Jewish Museum in Hohenems and the Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue in Vienna. And I'm very, very happy that we have a very special guest tonight. We have Avraham Burg, who is known by many of you from the public who is attending. But just a brief introduction, he has been a politician in Israel for many years. He left politics kind of almost 20 years ago, if I'm not wrong, and he is now a political activist and a writer and author. And Hanno Loewy, as you all know, is the director of the Jewish Museum and a wonderful, wonderful human being and a brilliant director who just sits with the how do you call it, with the announcement of his last exhibition, the letzten Europäer, the last Europeans, that is going on in the Jewish Museum in Hohenems. And all of you who are listening to us and who are maybe also close to Hohenems, not to travel too far, I invite you very cordially to go to Hohenems and to visit the museum, which is wonderful and which has this wonderful exhibition on the last Europeans. I will not take more time. I thank you all very much for being with us. And I give Hanno the word to open the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gertraud, and also welcome to Hohenems, somewhere between Europe and Israel. Yeah, we are glad to have you here, at least virtually, Avraham, in the program, both of the Kreisky Forum about borders and identities, and our program here in Hohenems with respect to our exhibition, The Last Europeans. And just to start with a little introduction into our conversation, I mean, conflicts about the future of Europe or the meaning of Europe have always been linked to disputes about the meaning of European Jews. And once their emancipation was seen as a test case for the liberal hopes of Europe in the 19th century, and also their cross-border cosmopolitanism as a precursor of European unification. And they also were seen as a scapegoat for nationalist ideologies. Today, interestingly enough, Jews, but particularly what people in Europe think about the state of Israel, seems to be a symbolical test case for nationalism, and which means Jews are now admittedly seen under the opposite sign as the favorite child of right-wing populist and nationalist politicians. At least more and more you can have this impression if you look into current political debates. And Avraham, I mean, you yourself have crossed many borders in your life, and which does not mean that you changed, but the borders around you changed and made you crossing borders. And after your political career, having been Speaker of the House of the Knesset, and also being active as the head of the World Zionist Organization, but mainly active in the Labour Party and also in the Peace Now movement, you stepped out of these kind of politics and became a political activist mainly in writing and in producing ideas. And one of the ideas you came closer to every year, and now expressed that in a kind of legal act, was to define your own position as an Israeli beyond the limits of ethnic or religious identities. And you do that as a very concerned about religion Jewish person. I mean, one of the books you wrote, and I'm not talking about books like Hitler besiegen, defeating Hitler, but this book, very near to you, is a reading of the Torah, and is a book in which you explore, I mean, everything you learned in your family, being the son of the leader of the National Religious Party, in fact, Joseph Burg, but also your own exploration of the Torah as something, as you called the book, very near to your, something not in heaven and not far apart, but something very close to our lives, and also close to the necessity to reinterpret these scriptures every day anew. So you are not exactly what somebody would call a secular person, but you are definitely somebody who does not take for granted anything that is in these scriptures, but also not taking anything for granted that is written on the walls of political ideologies and doctrines. And the step that caused quite a debate in Israel a few weeks ago was that you insisted to be taken out of the entry in the Israeli civil registry as being a Jewish national. And you argued that being an Israeli is enough and not need to be connected with the category of a Jewish national. What motivated you to do this, and why did that cause a wide debate in Israel? Why was that a scandal?
Oh, you said so many things. I don't even know where to begin to address some of the topics you put on the table. So I'll begin with a piece of biography that maybe Gertrude mentioned, and there was a glitch in my internet that I missed. A lot of my contemporary thinking and writing I conceived as a fellow at the Bruno Kreisky Forum. I mean, I think that at the last decade or more, I'm very much engaged with Vienna in general and with the Bruno Kreisky Forum in particular, and was very, very influenced by the openness of the place and the value system of unequivocal and undoubted humanism and universalism in such a way that when you go back home to your own private identity, when you come back from the larger, widest definition of humanity to your own particular pieces of identity, me, have to check what is not really fitting with my upbringing, my Kinderstube, up until the very high standards of values and criterions that the Bruno Kreisky Forum and its community and cohorts stand for. So a lot of my
would you switch your microphone a little louder?
Yeah, well, I can simply shout.
You can do that.
I will shout as if I'm back to the Knesset, so there is no problem, and the microphone is indifferent to my voice level. Having said that, I will say you mentioned borders. I hardly changed since I moved into politics. When I moved into politics at early 80s, I had actually two wins in my sails, or both coming from the great spirit of Professor Isaiah Leibovich, who was my teacher and mentor. And actually the two core businesses of my political agenda were separation between church and state and getting to an end of the occupation of the Palestinian people. It is now, I don't know how many decades later, I still stand for the end of the occupation, and I still stand for the separation between church and state. So I didn't change very much so. Yes, the political vehicle is different, the public venues are different, but nonetheless, the motivation is the same. The Israeli society changed dramatically. More religious, more fundamentalist, more nationalist, more chauvinist, more illiberal, etc., etc., etc. So in a way, I stand in the same place, while the Israeli politics, the Israeli public, the Israeli polity, mainly the Jewish polity, moved away from the places this used to be 50, 60, 70 years ago. Having said that, one of the things that happened recently, 2 years ago, was the Knesset passing, our parliament passing the nation law bill, which is a basic law, which is equivalent to a constitution, which defines Israel as the nation, as the nation state of the Jewish people. And this actually created a de jure situation that many things that I didn't like at a de facto level of discrimination, of segregation, and preventing privileges or basic human rights and civil rights from the Palestinian population, both in the occupied territories and within Israel. It was de facto, so you always had the motivation, well, one day we shall change the de jure one, all of a sudden it's a law. And when I look at this law, I say to myself, what they did with this legislation, which is legitimate, that's the majority, expresses the will of the majority via its delegates in the Knesset, is actually redefining the nature, the characteristic, the property of what does that mean to be a Jew and what does that mean to belong to a Jewish collective. I was born and I grew up and raised and educated as part of the classical historic Jewry, which is, never mind what denomination you belonged to, but the two basic arguments, demands and expectations of the Jews were, A, we would like to be equal but different, different but equal. And all of a sudden, I'm the majority, I'm the authority, I'm the sovereign, I'm the Israeli, I'm the Jew. And all of a sudden, it's not allowed to be neither different and you cannot be equal. And I say it's okay for you to define the collective differently than what used to be. But I do not belong conscientiously. I do not belong to your definition. And therefore, I appeal to the court in Israel and say, and it will be a long process, but eventually the intellectual, moral, and historic debate will take place between me and the contemporary state of Israel. And I say, it's okay to redefine the Jewish collective differently. I do not belong to it, and therefore do not register me at the population registry as a Jew, because I belong to a different definition. And maybe there are two Jewish people today. One, the Israeli proto-fascist, nationalistic or chauvinist nationalistic one, and the other one that I knew, which is the Jewish people of my parents, Jewry of Martin Buber and Walter Benjamin and and Stefan Zweig and Franz Rosenzweig. And I belong to these people.
What was the reaction to your move? I mean, first of all, I mean, you appealed, so there's a legal cause, I understand. So what is the process?
The process is, once the Supreme Court will finish to deliberate its deliberation about all the appeals that members of Knesset and other civil organizations apply to the Supreme Court, it will be a final piece of legislation in the Book of Laws of Israel, and then it will be an activation for my appeal to the district court in Israel, asking to remove my registry as Jew according to the definition from the population registry. The reaction surprised me. It's not the first time in my history or in my short history in public life in Israel in which ahead of time I raise issues and Israelis shout at me, and 10 years later they get to it. At the 92, at the very famous, or some would say infamous, convention of the Labour Party, I passed a resolution against the better judgment of late Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres, calling for a separation between church and state. People wanted to suffocate me at the time. Now they say, "Oh, why didn't we listen to you when we look at the contemporary situation between church and state now in Israel?" 10 years later, I published almost at every international newspaper in the world, Le Monde, New York Times, and others, an article saying Zionism is dead because it's impossible to continue with the original ideas of some liberal ideas that were part of some agendas in the Zionist thinking, and continue to occupy the territories and deny the civil rights, human rights, and democratic rights of millions of people. Was big controversy, but then I wrote another book, which you mentioned, about the overpresence and omnipresence of the Holocaust in our life. I mean, defeating Hitler or besieging Hitler. People were upset at me, but now all of a sudden they say, Avraham, you were very moderate about it. And now I say, I know where the people will be in 10 or 15 years' time. I simply say today ahead of you. So the reaction was amazing. For the first time, or one of the first time in which I raise issues like this to the public discourse, people did not first ridiculed me. People did not use cynicism and ridiculing in order to avoid the debate. People moved into the debate. It was publicly debated at the media and some intellectual spheres, and amazing line of contacts. I would say more than hundreds of people, and some of them very, very interesting qualitative people called and say, we would like to join your appeal to the court. And I just mentioned one name in this just as a food for thought. There are so many others. One of the most key witnesses at the Eichmann trial was Katzetnik. Then a survivor, an author who wrote about the post-trauma of the time, powerful writing. He is actually the one who made the emotional significance of the Eichmann trial. His daughter called me and she wants to join the process. Can you imagine?
That's unimaginable.
and a few others, from professors high up at the academia to people from the street who say we are fed up with it. So it looks as if we're touching a chord here. Let's see where it develops.
I mean, with this move, I mean, you touch a subject that is not a question only in Israel. It becomes more and more a question in Europe. And when you mentioned the Kreisky Forum in the beginning as a place where you enjoyed a kind of spirit and an openness of ideas and reflection about the development of Europe, I also had the impression that this was a very pastoral dream that we all had of where is Europe developing to. If we look into what happens in Europe in the course of the last 10 years, I definitely would say that the image is much less pastoral and much less causing optimism, because this kind of defining nations, again, along ethnic definitions, or even religious definitions, is becoming more prominent in Europe as well. And the strange thing is that now Israel is not, the Jews are taken as an example of cosmopolitanism, but Israel is taken by Europeans as an example for a successful ethnic defined nation. And I mean, you have two passports, actually. I mean, you are Israeli, but you are also French. And I have no idea how you relate to these two passports, apart from the formal thing that a passport is granting you, some advantages and disadvantages. But how you position yourself on the trajectory between being Israeli and French, out of all places, in this new developments in Europe as well?
First, I'm privileged because I have the opportunity to be not 50% Israeli and 50% Europeans, but 200% of a human being. I'm 100% Israeli and 100% European. So it's a real privilege to be a double person rather than to be half a person or splitted personality. Having said that, yes, I love my naivete, and I know that Europe is not exactly the marshmallow, pinky, rosy reality. That's for sure, okay? And I realize some of the erosive powers working on the European concept. And I mean the EU concept or the European Union one, not the rest of the continent, which not all of it is under the same roofing. And I would like to say as follows. First, Europe, all during history, surprises me, amazes me, attracts me, among other reasons, because the old continent, with all of its problems, and there are so many problems, somehow always knew how to renew and reinvent itself. There are places which are either traditional or conservative or stuck in the past or have some whatever naive future vision, but hardly ever renew themselves. Europe time and again renewed itself politically, theologically, sociologically, economically, scientifically, you name it. And I believe that a major part of the forefront, the frontier of the Western civilization goes through Europe today. And therefore the success of the Europe alike, the general, the universalist, the humanist, to overcome the other opposition powers also growing in Europe, is in a way the future of the West. And I will give you two examples for it. We both were born into the parameters or into the paradigm of liberal democracy. What is liberal democracy? What is this equilibrium? Democracy says, in a way, that's the expression of the will of the majority, and the liberal is the protection on the one, of the rights and the freedoms and you name it. So the equilibrium between the one and many created the liberal democracy. We are now living in a period of time, never mind when it began, that there is a very ugly divorce between liberal and democracy. There are more and more places in which the democratic machinery, the democratic mechanism works, but it is less and less liberal, to the level in which Viktor Orban declares that Hungary is an illiberal democracy. That's a terminology, I think, taken from Fareed Zakaria 25 years ago. And there is a whole spectrum of leaders like this that believe in the democratic mechanism as long as it votes them. And once they are in power, they do the best in order to weaken the safeguards and the gatekeepers of the democratic system and its equilibrium with the liberal rights and freedoms of the individual. Unfortunately, the one who gives kosher certificates for so many illiberal democracies around the world, from Trumpism as an ideology of illiberal democracy, to Viktor Orban, to the Polish leadership, to Putin, even to Erdogan in some cases, is the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think it's a shame that 8 decades after the end of the Second World War, Jews in Jewish communities around the world, inspired by some Israeli ideologies, are standing to the side of the xenophobes, Islamophobes, people who spread hatred all over the world. And they say, they hate the Muslim, therefore they love the Jews in order to get a hechsher to hate the Muslims. And I believe that's not only a shame, it's a moral failure of the system. And therefore, for me, the world is not divided anymore. Israelis and the rest of the world, or Europe, good Europeans versus the rest of the world. It is some of us and some of you versus some of us and some of you.
Let me address...
Just one last sentence. Yeah. For me, Viktor Orban and Benjamin Netanyahu are the rivals and the adversaries at the other side of the border. And at the same time, as much as I cannot say words like this, Angela Merkel is on my side, as much as she is a conservative. As dialectic and as stupid as it sounds. And therefore, for me, being an Israeli and a European, it's It's a very logical, seamless concept. It's the same. I fight. I want to defeat them.
Let me address once more the image that you pointed on of the core of democracy as the rule of the majority and liberalism as the right of the individual. Could it be that one of the problems that we have today to get out of this kind of deadlock is that Europe did not manage after 1945 to implement in between these two elements, the right of the majority and the right of the individual, one element that becomes more and more prominent as something to address since we have migration as we have it today, and that is the right of minorities, not of individuals only, but of minorities. Not of minorities in the essentialist way that there are other cultures that can't be changed, but simply as minorities of people who, at least at a certain point in time, choose to define themselves collectively in difference and on a tableau of diversity as others also by themselves, not only being othered by the majority. And the question is, how could that be implemented into this European system of liberal democracy that comes to a kind of dead end at the moment?
Okay, let's walk a little bit. Let's walk around a little bit. The definition, for me at least, the minute you have individual rights, so every individual has the right to congregate in congregations. So individual rights becomes communal rights and community might be a minority. So rights, you can have them as much as possible and as much as needed, as long as they do not collide and therefore call for the eradication or the annihilation of the other. So it's about a very gentle, fine dialogue between rights and rights, communities and communities, identities and identities. And the issue of identity is very crucial for many, identity and belonging. Having said that, I feel that the term Judeo-Christian is a good marketing brand. I'm not at all sure I buy the entire thing, okay? I'm not at all sure, but it's not this seminar, it's the one for next week, okay, Hanno? Let's leave the Judeo-Christian paradigm for one other day. But nonetheless, I have to understand something about Europe, and we have to understand one thing. Europe, it was easy for Europe to be tolerant and to be pluralistic and to be a containing political entity because so many societies in Europe succeeded in previous bloodshed rounds to clean the society from the element of the other. Many places, many Protestant places cleaned or extradited or even killed the Catholic, and Catholic did the same to the Protestant, to the Lutherans. Those did it to the Romans, others did it to the Jews. So many societies were in a way very monogeneous. All of a sudden into this, and it was very, very easy. I mean, I'm very tolerant to like me people. That's fine. It's not difficult. I understand them. They understand me. We have the same value system, the same value language, the same legacy, the same heritage. Okay, it works. All of a sudden, in the last 50 years, since the 70s and the Turkish Gastarbeiter and on, a new element walks into Europe, and that's a Muslim minority. Now, I do not believe there is a Muslim European community, because the Maghreb Islam is not the same as the Turkish one, and the Turkish one is not the same as the Al-Azhar Cairo one, etc., etc., etc. Nonetheless, all of a sudden we have a serious, substantial, influential, and symbolic non-Christian, non-Jewish element within Europe. So much so that in some of the football teams in your clubs in Europe, you have Muslim players, very talented, but therefore you cannot have alcohol producers as sponsors. Wow, that's difficult. What do you do? Look at the history of Bayern München and Frank Ribéry, who converted into Islam in order to get married, and what happened there vis-a-vis some of the creeds of the Muslim behavior and faith. Having said that, all of a sudden you realize that these tolerant to like me people, Europe and European communities, do not yet have a strategy how to talk to the new non-European, non-Christian element in its midst. And it has two dimensions. The first one, it's a minority, which is so much different than the majority. And the second is Europe, that you can characterize most of it in the last 100 years, and maybe even more than 100 years, as a very secular civilization, has to find secular, laïc answers to questions coming from religious dilemmas.
There was a very simple idea about the relationship, the idea of secularization and enlightenment in Europe. You could be enlightened and you could be secular as long as you're Christian. And which means that was always an idea that does not really challenge the character of society. It just was a debate on how secular and how enlightened you are. And this idea now is even able, as we now have others to draw a line to, is now incorporating Jews. Not opening the seminar about Christian Jewish Abendland identities, but this Christian enlightened idea of Europe is now able to swallow the Jews. They are no challenge anymore. Sad for us, I would say. We are not a challenge anymore for this. But with a large segment of the population that is not part of that, but brings in its own traditions and contradictions and conflicts and dilemmas, is now actually the proof of the pudding, of the proof
is in the pudding.
Of pudding. Because if Europe really wants to be secular, it has to be able to live with that. It has to be able to live as a secular society that can live with different Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, or whatever parts of its society. And they have to accept that they live under a secular umbrella. But that's the proof of the pudding. So I would say enlightenment starts now.
I'm not at all sure I argue with you, but I feel that it's only one dimension out of many. So let me offer you another dimension. Enlightenment, modernity, secularism was about the hegemony of the logic, scientific proof, A plus B equal C, etc., etc. When you have a president of the United States of America who tells you, listen, there is a pandemic, so drink disinfectant. Well, I'm not at all sure it's a good secular logic or good secular thinking. It's asholic in a good day, but it corresponds very profoundly with the era of illogic. So illogical thinking is part of the liquid postmodern reality of the European Enlightenment, regardless of the Muslim and religious challenges. People are not happy anymore with the answers modernity supplied in the last 200 to 250 years. And people are looking for some other explanations which are not necessarily logical. They can be spiritual, feel me, touch me, etc., etc. So the address of the nature of the classical European secularism, the laïcité, is to be challenged from both directions, from within, because the collapse of the Western civilization vis-a-vis the illogical postmodernism, new ageism, etc., and the knocking on the door from the outside of alternative ways of life. One of them is the Muslim immigration, faith and belonging. The other is religious fundamentalism. And the third one is the base, the Christian evangelical base of the Republican Conservative Party in the United States of America, which does not accept the same foundations that we are talking about. So this challenge is not necessarily all of us versus all of them, but some of us and some of us versus some of them and some of them.
I would go along with this. Yeah. Still, the question is, if you look from an Israeli perspective on what's going on in Europe, what kind of communication? I mean, we have this communication, as you pointed out, of the Orbans and the Kurzens and the Polish peace people and Salvini, and you name it, you get it. What kind of an alternative communication between Israel and Europe could somehow challenge this strange coalition?
I'll try to give first an answer from a structural political science point of view. When you take the list of the Israeli prime ministers since 48 up until today, I would say that 60–70% of them who were born abroad were born in Eastern Europe. Russia, Poland, Ukraine, you name it. And then came 48. And Israel, because of the Cold War and because of the Iron Curtain and because of so many other things, cultural and others, oriented itself toward the Central and Western European structure, which is parliamentarian democracy. When you look today at Israel, it resembles more and more the Eastern European model. Poland, Hungary, even Russia, which is one dominant tribe, very hegemonious and very monolithic, the centrality of the church or the religion, and enhanced proto-nationalistic or chauvinistic values, ideas, and actions. So Israel, in a way, is moving from its orientation towards Central European parliamentarian democracy towards Eastern European various models. Having said that, it falls into a bigger picture. From the end of the Second World War, let's say up until the economic crisis of 2008, I'm not at all sure this is an exact date, but let's take it just for the sake of conversation, in which both Brussels and Washington failed to deal with the financial fiasco. And from the end of the Second World War up until 2008 crisis, the liberal democracy or the Western democracy or the European European Washington kind of democracy expanded and expanded and expanded to more places, more influence, more countries and more states adopted the model. From 2008 now, almost we're into the second decade already, there is a setback in the expansion of this democratic value system. And alternative models are rising. The Russian one, the Chinese one, the Turkish one, and the illiberal one. So the competition is not anymore just Israel, what is the orientation of Israel, but what is the orientation of the rest of the world vis-a-vis the EU model and, let's say, the democratic part of America model. Into these larger parameters, I will say that in Israel, there are today 3 Cold Wars. The first is a cold, problematic war between church and state. What we spoke earlier about secularism or more traditional one. The second is about the future of our relationship with the Palestinians. And now here the struggle is not between the die-hard devotees to the 2-state solution formula and those who believe in a 1-state solution formula. It's a struggle between what kind of a 1-state solution will it be? Because as for today, there is no 2-state solution on the table. Not necessarily, I don't like it necessarily, but realistically, I don't see how it happens neither from the Palestinian side nor from the Israeli side. And therefore, the competition or the battle is between 1-state solution with 2 regimes, one full of privileges for the Jews and one full of discrimination to the Palestinians, and another formula, which I belong and believe, of 1-state solution, in which every individual between the Jordan and the Mediterranean has the right for the same rights. So the first Cold War is between church and state, or Knesset and Beit Knesset. The second one is between what kind of 1-state shall we have, full of discrimination or full of equality? And the third one is what should be the economic system of Israel? The contemporary one of almost harsh libertarian one, or a more social and democratic one. These are the struggles that Israel struggles today. I believe that the contemporary structure of the Israeli society, with a very, very strong Jerusalem and very weak rest of the system, is going to change out of the pandemic. Out of the pandemic, and if you smile now at me and laugh at me and ridicule me, I will join you, Hanno. In a second. The pandemic proved that Israel is looks much more like Switzerland rather than Moscow. Yes, the government gave instructions and gave sieges and curfews and you name it. By the end of the day, each and every community was an independent canton doing whatever they like. The Arabs, the ultra-Orthodox, the state of Tel Aviv, you name it. And Israel is already a federation of a de facto federation of all of its communities. This is on one hand a very interesting threat to the old Zionist structure of one small privileged group monopolize the rest of the identity, or a much more Swiss federation-like of a society of all of its communities with a different kind of conversation. If Israel goes to the direction that I believe, let's call it here the Swiss model, the possibility of this kind of federation-confederation to talk not just between the communities within Israel, but between Israel and Palestine, and later between Israel and the EU, is much more possible and close to mind than what meets the eye today.
There are 2 things at the moment which the ruling elite around Netanyahu and alike, there are 2 factors at the moment they try to use to show off their being in command of the situation. One is the the successful vaccination of the population in comparison to, let's say, European states, but also the US and others. I mean, there are rumors about how Netanyahu made it to get more BioNTech vaccines than others, opening the whole health system files for their testing, making Israel a test case for the vaccine, I don't know. And the other thing is the deals they are doing one after the other with some Arab potentates, the Emirates, etc., etc. I mean, they are playing one card like that after the other. And I mean, my impression is that the cards don't really value anything. But I mean, what will change? What will be the change? Or is there anything that will change by this kind of successful diplomacy with the Emirates and others? I mean, they invest the audience very much with that.
It's two different issues. The first is what is happening within Israel, and then what is happening between Israel and its neighbors, okay? What happens within Israel, we spoke a lot about it. Tonight, I'll add only one element, and this is, I spoke to so many German colleagues and friends of mine who said at the time, we knew no other chancellor but Kohl. So how could we vote something else but Kohl's party? There are too many Israelis who do not know anything else but Netanyahu. And the minute there will be no Netanyahu, and one day there will be no Netanyahu. I mean, I know it's not nice to wish it, etc., but among other things, he is a little bit limited because he still has a human body. He's eternal like King David. He will never die like the Lubavitcher Rebbe, okay? But his body might surrender to the call of nature. And the day after Netanyahu, you will see where is the real Israel today, because his omnipresence covers too many undercurrents that we do not yet see. And I will just say as follows. If Israel is having 3, 4, 5 different groups or tribes, President Rivlin described it as tribes, the ultra-Orthodox, the national religious, the settlers, the seculars, and the Arabs. I will say there are 2, 3 more, but it's irrelevant now. None of this group is a solid group. All of them dismantled. All of them are fragmented. And the identity of the old tribes is challenged nowadays. The melting pot melted. There is not even one cohesive Jewish Israeli definition. There is no one definition which defines all the Israelis who define themselves as Israelis. So it's a very, very, very fragmented, troubled society. Yes, you see the one leader, the Ein Führer. I see the many folks. And I believe that the solution is not a new leader, one leader, but how you institutionalize the diversity and the multiply tribal reality into something much more pluralistic and tolerant. And I think it's possible. Between us and the region, there is a moment of clarity and a moment of embarrassment. The moment of clarity is that the Arab regimes around us never seriously committed themselves to the Palestinian cause. They used it internally and externally. Finally came to power a generation who talks realpolitik, who do not really care about the Palestinian cause. And all of a sudden, the Arab League formula, which says, make peace with the Palestinians, and then you will have a comprehensive peace with the rest of the Muslim world, became an upside down paradigm. First, we have some agreements with the peripheries and the external powers of the Arab world. And then maybe later, maybe yes, maybe no, we should have something with the Palestinians. It is a very a clear moment of the end of the hypocrisy of some of the Arab regimes around us. And at the same time, the Palestinians, more and more of them realize that they are on their own and they cannot really trust the fellow Arab League partners, etc. Having said that, there is a moment of embarrassment as well. You remember that when George W. Bush invaded Iraq, for whatever reasons, whatever deception, the title was A Democratic Crusade. Okay, he was Richard Lionheart, and he went to meet Saddam Hussein, who was born in Salahuddin Tikrit, the same village. Yalla, okay, beautiful biography. But nonetheless, forget about the crusade, it was about introducing democracy. Yes, he tried to introduce a top-down democracy and to enforce democracy in a place in which I believe democracy should grow bottom-up, but this is a different educational, different philosophy on education. Now, all of a sudden, under Netanyahu and Trump and the Arab regimes around us, democracy is not an issue anymore. They can cooperate and they can understand each other because none of them is seriously committed to redeem their society from the discrimination of those who do not have basic rights. So the shared value language between elements in the Israeli society, like Netanyahu, and elements at the Arab world today, and elements in Washington, D.C., up until recently, is a moment of embarrassment because it's a serious change of paradigm from a Western world that Israel is its outpost, standing for expansion of the democratic values, to a very, very cynical realpolitik based on what my father used to say about one of his friends in his party. He used to say, that's a man of principles. Principle number one, opportunism. And this what looks today like what I will call illiberal opportunist democracy.
I mean, I think it was Netanyahu who called the Emirates a modern form of democracy, I think.
I teach, in the last couple of years, I teach in NYU Abu Dhabi. Every year, but this COVID-19 year. The students are brilliant, fantastic kids. And what I realize is something which resembles me or reminds me many of my Israeli contemporary. They are fully westernized when it comes to technology, education, cutting edge know-how, etc., fully modernized and completely unwesternized.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete authoritarian, absolutist system. But Netanyahu, that's a model for modern democracy. And that tells much more about him and his ideas than it tells about the Emirates.
Let's put it, since we are into the letzten Europäer, okay, let's put it, the way I see it is a very half American, half Israeli, fully Emirates, but very non-European way.
Yeah. I mean, before we open the debate for those in the chat who ask questions or want to contribute opinions or ideas, just one last question before that. I mean, the legal process regarding the way you want to be part of society as a citizen, if that will be ruled in a way that will not allow you to simply be an Israeli without claiming that Israel is a state of the Jewish nation, if you are not successful, what will you do? Will you give up your Israeli passport?
You know me for so many years. You know that to make me give up on something takes more than that. I'm in my nature and in my modern hobby, I'm a marathon runner.
You are a what?
If I do not have it on kilometer 20, I will have it on kilometer 42. Not the first round, I will have it on the second round. And there is one thing that I know the power of text. Yes, we're living in a Twitter era in which 140 characters is almost a Nobel Prize creation or a piece of literature, but nonetheless, I write my ideas. I write them in books, I publish them in articles, I spread them around. A day will come, not today, tomorrow, not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, that somebody will stand up and say, wow, these rejected ideas of the minorities at the year 2021 should be the foundation of the new strategy for the majority. And therefore, I will keep working till one day it will change. I never give up.
Okay. We take that for the incentive for the discussion. I have already one question here in the chat, which is by Axel Jonek, a psychoanalyst from Konstanz, and he asked, where do you see a chance to introduce your ideas in public Israeli discussions so there can be more voters for a different politics? So would you give in and go back into politics?
I retired from active politics, and I'm not trying to recruit more voters. What I try to do is to promote ideas. Now, I've no doubt that some of the ideas, which are shared by many, I'm not the only one who work on this new setting of new ideas, that these ideas influence. For example, in the last couple of years, a group of us, Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs, Palestinians, working very, very hard towards introducing to the public a joint Arab and Jewish list running for the Knesset. We did not succeed for this election, but the change of the public discourse and the public atmosphere is felt. I mean, the Meretz party is having 40% among its leadership as Arabs. Netanyahu opened the discourse and conversation with the Arab segments. Labour Party is having all of a sudden a real substantial representative. So the ideas are not always to promote one more vote, one more seat, one more mandate, but it's to promote a set of ideas that will change the whole landscape of the political system. And I believe that the most important work done today is towards a party, and later after a party, maybe even a coalition or the entire system based on civil relationship between all of its citizens, rather than two national groups, Jews and Arabs, fighting each other to a level of no cooperation. So the cooperation between the two communities will begin by having a party which is based on civil concept of the society, and from there on, continue with its influence till the whole system is changed.
I have another question that came in through Facebook by Alex Argina. What if they do not accept to live under a secular umbrella? Is that not the right to change the secular thinking democratically? Okay, I mean, I understand the question, I hope, right, that there's also a democratic right to change a secular system into another one.
Not sure I understood the question, so I have a couple of
answers. If we have a democracy, isn't it a democratic right to decide not to live under a secular umbrella?
All is possible. I mean, but it's my democratic right to oppose any idea which does not stand for full respecting, accepting, containing equality of all the citizens. For me, any democracy which does not has at its core an absolute unequivocal commitment that each and every citizen is equal to the other citizen is not a full-scale democracy. I do not believe ethnical democracy is possible. I do not believe that discriminating democracy is possible. I do not believe that a democracy or system which claims to be democracy now leave aside the 20% of Israeli Palestinians, a democracy which does not allow me to marry my beloved one, but according to the religious law, is not a full-scale democracy. So I fight for a separation between church and state and full equality to all Israeli citizens, regardless of their national belonging. The national belonging is a party, is a private commitment or a private definition. The public one is equality for all and civil equality.
I think this is already, in a way, an answer to another question from Axel Jonik from Konstanz about the question that, I mean, the heart of the whole thing is that every person has a dignity, which means to be respected and treated equal. And I think you just responded to that. There's another question from Miriam Spiegel. My question is about the virulence of the pro-Israeli lobby. I mean, actually, I think here in Europe, Miriam is meaning the pro-Israel lobby who tries to silence criticism of Israel in Europe and the US as being anti-Semitic. How do you view the necessary inner Jewish response? I mean, this whole debate that we now have that is taking BDS as a symbol for criticism of Israel and then is taking criticism of Israel as the main expression of anti-Semitism today. I mean, that's a debate that is running throughout Europe and also in the US. I mean, you have
the definition of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
I would like to give two different answers. First about Israel and anti-Semitism, and the second one about, I believe, a different alternative philosophical intellectual approach to the whole challenge of anti-Semitism at our time. First is, yes, there is anti-Semitism in the world. Some of it is very annoying, some of it is very brutal, some of it is not really relevant. Yet, not every criticism against the state of Israel, and mainly its behavior in the occupied territories, discriminating its own Palestinian citizens and discriminating some of the non-Orthodox Jews, is necessarily an expression of anti-Semitism. The state of Israel under the conservative regime of Netanyahu and the Likud weaponized anti-Semitism to a level in order to silence every criticism and therefore to kosherize every unkosher measure it takes. And therefore it is necessary to make a distinction between real anti-Semitism and the political usage of it. The political usage of it should be criticized as anti-Semitism denial. And those at the head of the Israeli government who tries to use every expression which criticize Israel in the occupied territories the way I do, and many others do in Israel, as if it's anti-Semitism, it's the denial of anti-Semitism, which is as bad. The second is the whole notion of anti-Semitism. I'd like to offer something that I'm working now on part of it in my new book. And it goes as follows. I grew up that the world is divided into two kinds of people only, Jews and the Goyim who hate the Jews. Nothing in between. 14 million Jews, 7-point-some billion non-Jews, all of them hate us. That's the existential reality. Justify so many measures, justify so many paranoias, justify so many psychological profiles of the Jewish people and the Israeli nation, etc., etc. The more I think about it, I think it's a wrong reading. I think there is a shared syntax and a shared language between the Jew and the anti-Semite. And this is the language of exceptionalism. Many of the Jews believe that we are exceptional. We are the chosen people. Our blood is better. Our IQ is better. We are more genius. We are more this. We are more that. Whatever it is, we are exceptional in history. We are exceptional in humanity. The anti-Semite believes, yes, you're the Jew, you are exceptional, and therefore I hate you. You are a piece of bad news. So he believes that I'm exceptional by bad, and I believe that I'm exceptional by good, but we both agree that the Jew is exceptional. I reject this notion. I believe that the world is divided between those who believe the Jews are exceptional, and they might be Jews or anti-Jews, and those who believe that all humans are equal. I belong to the second party. and therefore, when I think about those Jews who have this kind of correspondence with the anti-Semite and the non-Jew, I ask myself, what is it exactly? They need each other. As Jean-Paul Sartre said that the anti-Semite defines who is a Jew, I will say that Jew defines who is an anti-Semite and who is a non-Jew, in a way. They need each other in order to define each other. I don't have this identity. I don't need the negation in order to define my positive identity. I have a different identity, which is not based on the negation of the other. Either he negates me or I negate him. Having said that, I will say that for me, the whole story of anti-Semitism, at least by people belong to my party, should be looked differently. At the past, the hatred of Jews was a significant core, very explicit emotional expression, religious, social, sociological, economical, etc., etc. Very, very unique. Nowadays, they don't hate. The hate against Jews is not, we don't have a monopoly over it. They have homophobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, Judophobia, you name it. There is a lot of hate. I mean, thank God we have we have an open market. Everybody can have his own or her own hatred. And I said the role today is not to say, no, 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 no. We have monopoly over hatred. They hate us more. Our role today is those who were the victims of this hatred in the past is to create and to be partners of the World Coalition Against Hatred, who will stand to the side of whomever suffers from hate speech and hate crime, be it a Muslim, be it a Jew, be it a Hindu, be it in Burma, Myanmar, or be it in Vienna or in Jerusalem.
There's one thing I would argue with you, but I think this is a subject for another seminar, as you put it. I mean, my impression is that there is indeed something between those who find Jews exceptionally good and exceptionally bad. I think there's quite a number of people in between these two extremes, which is the group of people who think that the Jews are exceptional. What I mean with that, given the fact that I don't know exactly 4.5 billion people in the world are either defining themselves as Christians or as Muslims. I don't have the recent number, which means they belong to a system of beliefs that take Jews as symbols, as exceptionally exceptional, which not necessarily means bad or good, but simply means to be a symbol for something, to be symbolically meaningful for their own history of ideas and development of ideas, which is, I think, the much more substantial phenomenon, if I count the numbers of people who are belonging in one way or the other to this group, than those who are the fierce anti-Semites and the fierce I don't know, being proud of being Jewish, exceptionally whatever genius. And I think this is making everything that you say or I say or Israel is doing or whatever a case for debate and a case for producing fantasies about and meaning and ideas about. And I think this is something which is much more pertinent than a wave of anti-Semitism where people are on the radical side. I mean, I think this is really,
I'm ready to debate it.
It's an own seminar.
I'm ready to debate it, but only after you will show me where the Jewish structure developed its process towards its Nostra Aetate. Nostra Aetate is the new policy of the Vatican and the Catholic Church developed in '65, which is a new creed towards the non-Christian religions, especially paragraph 4, chapter 4 about the Jews. About the Protestant is a different story, easier in a way. The Catholic are going through a very interesting process in the last 50 years, and 50 years in the life of the church is a moment. I do not yet see the Jewish theological thinking, be it the ultra-Orthodox, ultra-nationalists, or ultra-Zionist, a serious, profound, paradigmatic shift toward the non-Jew. And therefore, the conversation you suggest is impossible because one side already walks the walk and one side, which is us, do not walk the walk.
I do not agree, but I think this is also a question for another seminar.
I'm here.
But we don't have hours to continue, and there are a few other interesting questions. And one is, I think, a very sharp one, which is the question, if you really think the two-state solution is really dead, or is this, as it's put, the polemic of someone disappointed and impatient? So you already said you are a marathon man, but are you impatient?
About the two-state solution?
Yeah.
Let me answer it indirectly, okay? There is a question at the chat by a beloved brother of mine, Sam Bahur. Sam is an amazing American-born Palestinian living in Ramallah. And he says, great to see you, my friend Avraham. I fully agree, yada, 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 yada. If you were the PLO chairman, what are 3 things you would do today, Sam from Ramallah? It's the same question from a different...
I would have posted that question as the next one. Okay.
Here is the month of December 2016. I am in Ramallah and sitting with my friend, the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas. And he says, Avraham, in 6 months, it's June 2017, 50 years to 67 in occupation. What do you think we should do? I said, my friend, 5th of June, 2017, wake up in the morning, eat a good breakfast, put your best cravat, shave nicely, come to the office, say hello to everybody, and start walking very slowly. Not only because you are old and it's dangerous, but slowly from Ramallah de Muqata'a to the Kalandia checkpost. It's a couple of kilometers, and you walk very slowly. You don't say a word. You walk, and from all the streets and all the little alleys, people will join you. And there is a Palestinian march toward the checkpost. You come to the checkpost, you sit down, and you say, I'm going to sit here in a hunger strike till my Israeli contemporary, the Prime Minister of Israel, comes here, and here at the border, we negotiate the future of the 2 nations. I don't move from here. I told him, thousands of Palestinians will join you. millions of people around the world will look at you. The pressure of Israel from this kind of non-violent political measure will be immense. The prime minister does not have an answer for something like this. Give him terror, he knows what to do. Give him non-violent political action, he's lost. Said Abu Mazen, Avraham, it's a brilliant idea. I love it. Tell me one thing about this hunger strike. When is dinner? So Sam, for your question, my answer is we need leadership which is ready to devote more than a political maneuver and a political rhetoric. That's the first thing. The second thing is, as difficult as it is, if I'm today the Palestinian leader, I would have come to the Israelis and to the rest of the international community and say, the Palestinian Authority is the offspring of Oslo Agreement. In May 99, we were supposed to begin to negotiate the final arrangement and the final status in the Palestinian state. Never happened. So for the last 20, 30 years, we are the subcontractors for your occupation. I'm not ready to do it anymore. Here are the keys, take it. Because I, Avraham Burg, or I, a Palestinian leader, I do not count states anymore. I count rights. So it's not about counting political structures, but counting human rights and civil rights. And and the way I understand democracy is as follows. There are many definitions for democracy. One of them is a kind of a transaction. I, the voter, give you the elected, the delegate, I give you the right to impact my life via regulation, via legislation, via policy, via whatever you do. You impact my life and I can replace you. This is the quid pro quo. But a place in which millions of people, in this case Palestinians, cannot impact and cannot replace those who impact their life, it's not a democracy. And therefore my demand, going back to Sam as a Palestinian leader, is to come to the Israeli public and to the Palestinian public and to the international public opinion and say, I want a democracy. I want my people to vote for those who impact their life. So these two things, stop counting states and start counting rights and demand the basic democratic birthright. I want to decide who decides over my life. These two decisions will bring down, if you ask me, the entire Israeli occupational structure.
I've just moved a little that this great conversation takes place between Nataf near Jerusalem and Ramallah near Jerusalem through Hohenems in Vienna. And yeah, there's another question from Reihe from Munich to you, Avraham. Do you know of any other modern democracy that defines itself by a certain religion or ethnicity? I mean, do we have other examples?
I'm not at all sure, but it doesn't trouble me so much for the following reason. Christianity is one religion exercised by many people in multiple places. Islam is one religion fulfilled and worshipped in many places by many people. Judaism is one religion over one people that in the eyes of many can be fully exercised in one place only. And therefore taking a different structure, mental, spiritual, theological, national, and copy-paste it or cut-paste it from place to place, from people to people, does not exactly work. No doubt that the number one problem of the Israeli democracy is close or is a very close neighbor to what you mentioned here in your as if innocent question. And this is as follows. You go out to the street and you ask the Jews, forget about now the 20% of the non-Jews in Israel. What do you believe is the Jewish people? 70-some% will tell you we are chosen people. Chosen by whom? What is the chosenness? Not exactly clear. And when you ask people, what are the ingredients, the components of this chosenness? It is something about genetics. It is something about God selection or God appointment. It is something like a kind of superiority. Call it, instead of the white supremacy, it's the Jewish supremacy. The concept of chosenness, which maybe is helpful at the time of diaspora and exile for whatever theological reason, is totally unacceptable in a democratic system. Chosenness assumes that one individual is more chosen, more privileged, higher than the other. And democracy should assume that we are all equal. And the minute the Jewish people does not check out the notion of religious chosenness out of its catechismus in Israel, the democracy is a crippled democracy. So it's not so much to compare it to other places, it's to compare it to the internal Jewish problems and to deal with them.
But isn't it also informing this problem, as you describe it, that chosenness, as long as it's not combined with power, and I mean, to rule a state is power. To be a majority ruling a minority is power. I mean, as long as you are not talking about state and power, the idea of chosenness might be ridiculed, it might be embarrassing, it might be a hybrid idea, but it's more or less an idea. But if we talk about states, it starts to be.
I don't want to be not nice to you, but I urge you to wait a year or so till the publication of my next book. Have the patience for it.
That's fair. That's fair.
I explained the problems in a more vivid way than I can do in the next 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, no, I will. We all will wait for that. And it will appear not only in Hebrew, but at least in English, maybe even in German. We'll see. There is another question, and that is by Michaela Kopsa-Mark. I would like to ask if there has been a change in Europe regarding how critique of Israel is perceived. I mean, it's coming back a bit to the question that we already touched. How was it before Likud and Netanyahu? What changes do you believe to take place to be able to separate critique of Israel from anti-Semitism in European society?
I do not really know. I mean, I think that the memories of Simone de Beauvoir are called nostalgia is not what it used to be. I don't think that it was ever really, the nostalgia was that beautiful. So instead of answering you a kind of off-the-cuff historic description of various places, I will say as follows. Israel will never be a society which is, or a government or a political system which is accountable for its own measures and its own policies and its own action, as long as Germany at the midst of Europe gives it an unequivocal safety net to every whim it does. Only at the day in which Germany will treat Israel, let's say not as it treats the rest of the nation, but in a more logical, moral way, only then Israel will be held responsible for its measures. Up until then, the entire Europe, as much as I love it, as much as I belong to many parts of it, the rest of Europe is simply secondary and less important to Berlin and to the conservatives who run the show or runs the policy vis-a-vis Israel.
I just looked through the set of questions, and there is one here. This is a question actually very precise, addressing a contemporary question. What do you think about the fact that the majority of Palestinians till now are not vaccinated against COVID-19? This is a question by Jochi Beil from Zurich.
Well, the same way I feel about the majority of Europeans.
Pity, is that, would that describe it?
Yeah.
So, I have no questions here anymore in the chat. What I want to do is to say thank you to everybody.
To mention the blessed memory of Reihe.
Pardon? Yeah, I will do.
Yeah, please.
Avraham is also reading the chat. I want to say thank you to Avraham, and I actually wanted to say something about Rainer Bernstein, who died a few days ago, and who was one of those who never stopped fighting for peace and never stopped fighting for understanding, for a better understanding of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He was in a way attacked in public and in other ways that was unbelievable, and he never gave up, but he had to give up against his illness a few days ago, and I'm still pretty moved by this loss. He also left a little book that is collecting a few of his essays, and just can say it's worth buying that book, and that's already on the market. We don't need to wait a year for that. But it's always sad to lose people like Eine, because somehow you always hope that we all live long enough to see some glimpse of all those hopes you optimistically express, Avraham. This will definitely not be our last conversation, Avraham, and I very much hope that the next one will take place in Hohenems and also in Vienna again, when traveling will be easier again or possible. And I just want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you to Gertraud and the Kreisky Forum to help us to make that possible. It won't be the last event also in the series of events about borders and identities. Here you are back, Gertraud, and I just want to pass over to you to the last word. I hope you also enjoyed the conversation, even if you were bilocated, even in New York as well. Yeah, thanks, Gertraud. You have the last word.
Hold on. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, it was very, very interesting. Thank you so much. And I really like you both very much. You are inspiring. Thank you. And
I like you both, but only one of you I love.
Okay. Don't exaggerate. So thank you so much and also to the public. It was a huge crowd that was following, and I'm sure that people will follow in the coming days, because it will be on both our websites, on Hanno in Hohenems and on the Kreisky Forum in Vienna. So those who could not follow the conversation can join whenever they want. I wish you a good night. Laila Tov to
Laila Tov. Many thanks for the opportunity, both of you.
And thank you so much.
Have a look at Last Europeans EU. You will get the YouTube movie, and on the website of Kreisky Forum, the Facebook recording. I hope the sound will be okay and everybody can follow and look into it. And you can also distribute it to other people. That would be nice. Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.